Hi, welcome to the uh, ADHD, Odd HD, and Autism Virtually interview series. We have Jen, when we've, and I'm Corey. I use they, them pronouns, just so you know. And this is Biscuit, my emotional support, Jack Russell. And today we are joined by Esther Brennan, who's going to talk to us about um, some different kinds of yoga and how we can integrate some movement into our lives. Um, so I'm just gonna throw it to you, Esther. How did you get into this work, and tell us about yourself?
Sure. Well, I have been an autism support teacher for 8 years now. Um, Honestly, in the classroom, I'm always looking for different outlets for the students and different things that we can do. And randomly, I just kind of put on some YouTube yoga. The kids had a great response to it. I reached out to a yoga instructor and we did some things in the classroom, which we got a really great response to. And I wanted to do a little bit more, so I got a certification in children's yoga and in inclusive manner. Um, so outside of the classroom, I do some yoga classes with children with autism. And when I say yoga, it can mean doing poses. It can also mean I have a client that runs around and opens and shuts doors and deep breathes in between. So my goal has just been trying to use yoga in settings that meets individuals specifically. And then recently I started collaborating with a nature therapist who wanted to reach out into the neurodiverse community. I wanted to reach out into nature therapy. So we've been kind of trying to combine that and integrate some great experiences for the neurodiverse.
That's so cool. That's so exciting.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, I had a personal trainer for a few years, and I had tried before, for motivation, and my trainer had taken the yoga class too, and this was before I knew anything really about myself being on the spectrum, and it was it's the only thing that's really like helped me be me and embrace movement. So I know firsthand that it really works, and I'm excited to hear about more about your practice and my follow-up question was going to be, oh, do you do this both inside the school and outside? But you answered that. Which is cool. How so if a person is more inclined like me to have the opposite, like some people move around a lot, and um I'm more of a my ADHD is more in my brain, hyperthinking. And
Mhm.
how can a person who hates movement or isn't inclined to get up off their chair get started?
That is a really good question. And a lot of, the clients we've had are hyposensitive or, hypoactive instead of hyperactive. And, there's different movements and different things you can do to either calm down or try to pep up the body. Different poses and different breathing techniques. The other thing, I was thinking about when you were asking the question is movement doesn't have to mean a yoga pose, or a certain like a sun salutation or different asanas. So that's where like the nature therapy kind of came into play. Because part of yoga is, like I said, the poses are just one limb of it. There's also, nature, breathing, cleanliness, self-reflection. And that's where the nature therapy kind of moved us to something like that. These aren't students that say, I want to learn yoga poses, you know? So we thought, how can we do this? So a lot of it is walking. There's a sensory garden. So locally, um, our yoga session is walking through the sensory garden and taking on the five senses and pointing out colors and breathing in the smells, which elicits, you know, breathing out. Um, I did some research too, and one of our goals is to start hiking, but just kind of walks in nature. So that is movement, right? But it's not doing poses. Gardening is another thing. I read a lot about if you're not motivated to be doing the exercises, doing an activity outside, which in turn gives you the exercise. Does that make sense? And it gives you the movement.
Yeah,
Say you're
totally.
gardening and you're reaching across, you're leaning down, you're getting up, you're fulfilling yourself with the sights, the feels, the smells, the touch. So it's kind of thinking outside the box, I think, is a way to motivate.
Yeah, that's
Does that
been my
make sense?
definitely that's been my personal experience too, is just getting back to some activities that I didn't think I could do, or I couldn't do, like, quote unquote normal people. Um Gardening being one of them. And I've always loved dancing, but my I have POTS, which I don't know if you've heard of, but when I stand, my heart rate goes way up, uh,
Okay.
and then my blood pressure tanks, and it feels like I'm gonna faint.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and so I spend a lot of time sitting, but
Hmm.
I've done more strength training and breathing. You mentioned breathing, which I I was very skeptical of how much breathing can affect our muscles and our brains, our attitude. It those do you have any experience about that?
Oh, I just agree. Like, I mean, breathing sounds so, you know, we do it all day long. But I was really surprised at the emphasis when I was doing my trainings, the emphasis importance of that and just sitting and breathing. It doesn't constitute what we think of movement, I guess, but it still is doing the blood flow, the, you know, the oxygen flow in your body. It is a type of exercise, I guess, you know, which is interesting to think about. The other thing I wanted to mention is one of the strategies with the inclusive yoga was a lot of chair yoga. So, and so it's inclusive to some, you know, what you mentioned, I forget it already. Was it POTS?
Mm-hmm.
Where that might be a hindrance, or even when we were learning it, if you're, you know, someone with cerebral palsy or in a wheelchair or whatever, you can kind of adapt the poses to be done in a chair.
Nice.
Hey, you mentioned, gardening, and it
Mhm.
made me think about the vagus nerve. Gardening is actually one of a list. There's a list of things that can excite your vagus nerve. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that. A lot of people are. It's basically this nerve on the top of the roof of your mouth, right? And babies suck their thumbs. They do that because it makes you go right into your rest and digest nervous system. Like you don't have to choose to calm down. Your body does it for you, which is super helpful to know about and very helpful for for parents of kids who struggle to regulate their nervous system. And also you mentioned breathing. That's another way that because of where it's at, we can access that. So that
Yeah.
puts us right into our rest and digest. It will take us right out of like a stress response if we do it correctly. So I wanted to ask you, like, how familiar are you with the vagus nerve, and is that something that yoga um, definitely takes? Because you're talking about it, and I'm hearing how that kind of can cross over with calming down nervous systems.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and especially, and I think that's why it's beneficial for people with ADHD and autism, and then even more so like nonverbal children or adults or because it's regulating without, how do I say this? It's not the conscious idea, I'm going to start regulating. It's I'm going to breathe in and breathe out, and then just having those effects of it. Does that make sense? I'm kind of veering off your question a little bit, but that's what your question made me
No,
think.
yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Like, yeah, you don't have to choose, because I mean,
Right.
how do you like if somebody tells you to calm down? I don't know about you, Esther, but like I have the opposite reaction.
It means
Like,
nothing. They're words. But you can
right.
say breathe in and breathe out,
Yeah, like let's
or you
take
can
some,
do it and
I
have
think
the person mimic it.
you have to take like 3 deep breaths in and out, laughing. There's all different ways that you can access the vagus nerve, and it's an important thing to understand, and definitely something that yoga um, definitely does. Also, you mentioned the midline, right? Crossing the midline, which is something that ADHD and autistic children and all young children have to learn how to do, but it's harder for our guys since body mind connections a little bit runs hot sometimes. But
Mhm.
you were saying how it goes to the side. Um, does yoga in any way address that, the crossing of the midline, and how
Absolutely.
so? And
Yeah.
which can you show me like a pose or an exercise, something that you might do from yoga?
Yeah, well, one thing I do, and it's called mirroring, but I do it with my students, and it is a calming and it's also a focal thing. But crossing the midline does something to your brain where it's anything where you're just crossing a body part over to. So we do a lot of like tap, 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 reach, 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 that kind of thing that does a lot of things. It's crossing the midline. Like I said, it's focal. You're breathing while you do it. And that supports that self-regulation. So there's a lot about crossing the midline. It's a big deal. It was hard to kind of understand why it seems so silly. Like, why is this so good? But it's that, left and right side, and the focus that supports.
Yeah.
One of the biggest and most simple things that we can do if we're not doing a pose, just getting a child or even anyone, it just this is a little something.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. You did kind of just touch on this, but what are some other examples um of yoga being adapted? Um, do you have any others that come to mind?
Yeah,
Ways
sure.
poses are adapted for differently abled folks?
I mean, so there's a couple of different answers to that. One, I mentioned adapting actual asanas, which is the actual poses, using a chair, using the floor, just doing whatever works. The other way that I adapt yoga is, first of all, you can't force it at all. It's not like we're all sitting in a routine and do tree pose, and like it. It's putting a mat out and inviting the students, the whoever, to do it. To me, that's adaptive. It's also, I like to do it on an individual basis too, because the yoga or movement or anything that's going to be beneficial to the individual is individualized. So that's kind of the way in which I adapt. I mentioned, so I do some individual sessions, and I have one student nonverbal and he likes to mimic all the poses and he does great. Another one I mentioned earlier, little guy, he's 5 years old. I just give him the free rein to run around and we love to open and close doors together. I don't know if that's considered yoga, but to me it is. And to me, this little guy is so happy. And every once in a while, I, do that. And he does that too. But the rest of it's just running around. you know,
That's so cute.
I like to think it helps.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned using different senses in the sensory garden
Yeah.
earlier, and I recently learned the five senses. I don't know what you call it. I say example, where you think of like five things you see, four things you hear, three things you feel, and so on and so forth. Um, and Jen, I think you had a question about senses. Do you want to ask that one?
Yeah. So what you're talking about, yeah, it's a calming technique, right? Esther, are you familiar with it? Five. Yeah, that works for some people, and I know people it works for, but something that this is like movement, using movement to help neurodivergent people, that I learned is called Take Five, and it's a breathing exercise. Have you heard of it, Esther? You can do it
Uh,
together.
I'm not sure. I'll do it
Okay, so
though.
put your hand up. Okay, so what you do is you start by putting your finger here. And it's a breathing exercise. So you want to take in a slow, you don't do it yet, just watch me. Slow breath in, slow breath out, slow breath in, slow breath out. And we're gonna do it you do it 5 times. Okay. And if people are watching us, I'm gonna burn some time. Let's see if we can all do it together. And hopefully when you do this, it will, that vagus nerve we talked about, right? It will regulate the movement from that will help you calm down. It's good for me halfway through an interview. Okay, ready? So follow me. Remember, breathing in, pause, breathe out, pause.
I like that one.
You feel better?
I
There's
like
something
that
kids
one.
can do. Do you have
Yeah,
any?
and the
Always have your
touch.
hand with you. Do you feel calmer?
Absolutely.
Don't fake it.
And the senses, the touch part of that is really nice. There's
Focal. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
I
I do
noticed.
one with the students where if they're really upset, and it's a quick one, but we say peace begins with me, or if they're nonverbal, just tap, 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 tap. But it's just enough to get them to, because you have to think for just a second to get those two fingertips to touch, and it's just enough to like, you know, take a little pause.
I noticed that I like doing the mirroring. Like I was watching Jen, didn't know where to go, even though I knew it.
Hearing is huge too. I mean, that's because again, it's a concentration, you know, it's a focal point.
Yeah, I, that kind of makes sense. I'm much better at focusing outside of myself, even though I have very internal feelings.
Well, it feels good kind of to just watch someone else and repeat it. It's
True.
that can take a little pressure off you for a second.
Chanting also, like what you're doing is like peace begins with me.
Right. It's a little
Begins
mantra,
with me.
you
And
know.
if you say it in a group, chanting also has a very calming to your nervous system, helps you calm down. So movement and mind and body, like the connections are really cool. Like, yeah, yoga is awesome. We can talk about how, which is not something I really thought about, is inclusive yoga because I, okay, quick story. So my one client, right, teenage client, and I was thinking, we needed a way to help her calm down. She is autistic. Okay. And so I'm like, let's try yoga. So like it's a 20-minute video. And all I learned, that was my only yoga thing. Okay. All I learned is I hurt myself. I looked ridiculous. I couldn't hold the poses. And this teenager is rocking it and making me feel even worse, despite the fact that she is laughing like nonstop at my horror. And I was sore for the next day. So, we can use movement, whether yoga is great. I guess not for me. Maybe I would try it again if it was more inclusive, especially chair yoga. Like I'm so into the idea. It seems so much like more me. But movement's awesome because you can use it in so many ways to regulate yourself. And one of my questions was, as Corey alluded to, was we know through research that movement is very beneficial for everyone, but especially for neurodivergent individuals who may have delayed nervous systems. Emotional dysregulation is a key in ADHD, something that autistic people struggle with. You've got I said delayed nervous system, right? Which basically, I'm going to go back and touch on what that means is we spend, as children, neurodivergent people spend way too much time in the bad nervous system, in the fight or flight, fawn, freeze part of our nervous system. And wherever we are in our brain, and that is in the lower downstairs part of our brain, that's where what we're building up. And we're not building up the thinking brain up here. So that would be considered delayed because your thinking brain may be a bit more behind somebody your age. Like I'm not gonna tell you how old I am. You can say 5, 10, it doesn't matter where you're at. We're always just a little bit behind the curve. Also our senses, like being able to integrate our senses, is delayed, whether you're ADHD or you're autistic. And even like our body brain connection, which we've been talking about, and ways to ground yourself through the 5 senses, like when you're feeling a little bit out, or even like my hands are touching my thighs, my butt is in my seat, my feet are on the ground, like any type of those grounding activities, movement can really help with. So, but when we're talking yoga, Esther, like what are the benefits? We'll go through the 4 things I mentioned. Nervous system benefits, for people who may be interested in doing it, or for parents of neurodivergent kids. What are some of the nervous system benefits?
Well, I guess it all comes down for me, and what I've kind of learned is just the regulatory of like you said, the over processing of sensory, of the fight or flight, all that stuff. And we talked about breathing a lot. It's calming down that system and doing it on a subconscious level. It's not a therapy and talking about why I feel this way or that. It's body, it's mind and body. Does that make sense? So when you calm down one, you're calming down the others.
Yeah.
And it's just a physical reaction, basically.
Yeah, you could also probably say that about like emotional dysregulation. I mean, if you're focused on like, okay, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, I'm going to focus on my take 5 thing, which is what helps me, right? And I'm focusing on my body, which is kind of controlling my mind. So do you notice, like with your students, if they're having a hard time or maybe having an overwhelming feeling, moments that yoga and the movement and the breathing has helped them?
Yeah, I mean, and it's tough because even if you were to try to take data on that, it's really hard because it's so individualized and so kind of up in the air. But I've had many students, especially, so like when I do it in the classroom, we'll do some movement and stuff. And then at the end, we do what's called Shavasana, which is just laying flat. A lot of times we have weighted wheat bags is what we use on the body. And they will lay there in Shavasana for a good 15 minutes. And I think, and some of these students are not regulated at all, hyperactive, busy, but I have noticed that, and that's the most, I guess, impressive observation I've made is the ability to lay in Shavasana.
I should try that. That sounds like right. What do you think, Corey? Like that's right up my alley.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Laying down,
Done
sign me up.
I've
I think
done a
that's
bunch
kind of,
of
oh, go ahead.
sorry. I've done a bunch of gentle yoga, which is like yoga, adapted yoga, my understanding, and you get into certain poses, but you're supported, and
Yeah.
like you'll use blankets and like the bags that you were talking about to like prop your body up, like if it's hard to hold your arm in a certain position, so I'd be holding the pose, but I'm not having to hold it myself, if that makes any sense. Or
Yeah.
is there a better way to say that? Do you
No,
wanna?
I think that's just fine.
It was really wonderful. I would
But
say life changing.
Yeah, I mean, and again, you know, we think of yoga in a certain way, but it's not only helpful if you can do a pose, you know, and a lot of it, especially for the uh, hyperactive or hypersensitive, is using the weights. A lot of times we use them on the face too, on the eyes, um, and
Mhm.
laying in that pose, especially if your body is very like this. Having those weights here and here and here and here gives them the gravity and the stability to kind of appreciate. Sorry, I'm at a lack of word. The pressure that might not be felt in everyday life.
Yeah, I didn't expect that I would be able to hold the pose for so long. I thought I would give up after a certain amount of time, and I could do it. So like that also gave me a boost of confidence and self-esteem.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And like the teenager laughing at me. But then it was all about poses. Like, so I need to
It
rethink
was all
about what
about
yoga
the
is. Yeah, it was only the pose. Did not hold the pose without the support. I the blankets, you know, if I had like things supporting me, it might have went a little bit differently. I didn't know that that was a thing because if you hear about yoga, you just see like the yoga pants, the super like trim person doing all these crazy poses, you
Right.
know, and hold and listen to the music. It's so calming. It's like your arm is screaming in pain.
Yeah.
But yoga's a lot more than that, and I'm learning that from you,
It
Esther.
is, and I think that's where when I met Beth, the nature therapist, it was how to get the benefits of yoga without kind of escaping the poses and all that stuff. And that's where, I mean, some of our collaboration is how do we get these students or these children, they're mostly children that we work with, to reap the benefits of indulging in the five senses, indulging in movement and self-regulating. And that's where we kind of came up with these outside activities, you know, and nothing is forced. It's just exposure, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So with including nature, is it more being in the atmosphere, like being outside, or um I think you mentioned gardening. Like
Mhm.
how does that work in specific with
I
the
mean,
nature?
very let me see. Let me just go through some things we've done. Like the first collaboration I did with the nature therapist was taking some children from the support group that I run and their parents, and it was planned out, but it was also very child led in what we did, and we
Mhm.
talked a lot about in the nature setting, doing things like picking out flowers. It was actually really interesting. We had some great conversations about this while we were planning because she wanted to say to the children, look at this flower. How does that make you feel? And I said, let's not go there. It's not going to be a conscious thing. Just say, what is your favorite flower? And let the child run over to the flower and smell it. And then you're getting their preference, their movement, a deep breath of the flower. And it's
Yeah.
very, like I said, it's not a conscious, like, let me think about how this makes me feel. It's just feel. Look, take the question out of it, take the abstractness out of it.
Very, very in the moment.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then just let the regulation happen, you know,
Cool.
if that makes sense.
How how did you get into yoga at all? Like, were you into yoga out outside of with working with in your classroom,
I
or
Not really. And it's funny, Jennifer, you mentioned something about that earlier. My older sister always said, when you grow up, you're going to teach yoga to children. And I don't know why she said that because I've never even taken a class.
oh my
I just,
gosh,
yeah, she was just very intuitive.
that's wild.
into alternative ways to teaching and to supporting my students. You know, even in a self-contained autistic support classroom, it's very academic. The academics are pushed, and I can't stand that. And I'm more interested in helping these children cope and regulate and find ways to get through a world that can be really challenging for them. And honestly, the yoga thing just came up randomly, like, maybe they'll like that.
Interesting.
And there just happened to be an art teacher that I know is a yoga instructor as well. And we collaborated. I invited her into my classroom. And we made a slideshow of different yoga moves. I had a couple students, this was kind of surprising, who wanted to lead so we would do this slideshow of some movements and stuff. One of the coolest things is, and not planned, was some of the students wanted to lead it. So there would be one yoga mat in the front leading the other
Wow.
students, which was really neat and supportive. And then from that, like, yeah, then I just wanted to actually know what I was doing, which is why I did the training.
Cool.
That's
I
really cool.
I was during the pandemic, I noticed a lot of people, you know, we were all staying at home, and a lot of people were trying exercise videos, and of course the dance crazes on TikTok. And I wondered if the pandemic changed anything for you, like personally or professionally. Um, uh, and like, is there in the now times, is there more need for movement classes? Um,
That's a good question. I mean, I believe without any real proof, yes, you know. Um, I wasn't doing the yoga or the nature therapy or any of that during the pandemic, so I don't have a good sense of before that, during that, and after that. I only have the after part. Um, in terms of being an autistic support teacher and connecting with my students and working on things like self-regulation and calming strategies, I couldn't do that, you know, virtually. Yoga aside, that's not something that was really addressed or um, even possible, I think, during the pandemic.
yeah,
So I feel like that was a bit of a struggle because those practices were probably not being addressed very much.
yeah, that makes sense. It was a really difficult time for a lot of people. It What I thought at first, the excitement of being able to stay home, and also has been you know, kind of a negative, because I'm less likely to get back out now.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, it probably did, now that you've asked that question, elicit some need for movement for me. I mean, I just was thinking back to the pandemic, and we were off school for a while, and I was probably more active than I had been in years. That was my personal experience because I
mhm,
didn't have anything to do. So, and I told you earlier,
yeah.
I'm a pacer. You know, so I
Hmm.
was outside and walked and did all that stuff more than I had ever before. Um, but that's aside from my students or any of that. That's just my personal experience. Maybe it did elicit something in me though. I mean, maybe that motivated me to gravitate towards movement and choosing this path with my students.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like it's a possibility.
Yeah, yeah. I'd not thought about that before. Thank you.
Yeah, I know a lot of, at the time we were doing the pandemic, I worked I worked in behavioral health. So I had two autistic brothers that we worked with, and man, going from like living their lives with them, being like ride or die bestie, like we got this, there's nothing we can't do. Just, like you said, just going through life, just letting things happen and then dealing with them versus like putting thought into, okay, Johnny, we're going to do A, B, and C today so that your coping skills go up. It's just about dealing with life as it happens.
Right.
When they had to sit and do Zoom, it was brutal. I mean, and they had to try to cope through that. And there was no way I could, from like my house, help them co-regulate, which is something, you talked about how you liked modeling and it made it calmer watching it and doing it with me. Our nervous systems are built no matter what your neurotype is. Human nervous systems are all about co-regulating. We do better when we're together. And if you struggle with regulation, then being together is super helpful. And I know, like, for my guys, A, having to sit, B, being alone because we aren't really together. Do you know what I mean? We can kind of connect a little bit, but you can't regulate your nervous system to my nervous system.
Right.
Not something
Right.
we can do via Zoom. Yeah, so it was really tough for them. And I would see how, and I realized too, like having to sit, like watching them struggle, because like we never actually had to sit. We just did whatever, like, okay, this is something they struggle with and I need to work movement in more,
Right.
for sure. Okay, I have one more question to wrap this up. And I was going to ask Esther, but I'm also going to ask Corey because, spoiler alert, 3 ADHDers it sounds like a bad joke, right? 3 ADHD people in a Zoom room. Right. So the question is I have, like, that's not something that when you were talking about what you do, you didn't mention that you were neurodivergent yourself, Esther. I'm pointing out that you are. And my question is, I have it typed out, so I'm gonna make sure it makes sense. How has being neurodivergent being neurodivergent yourself motivated and influenced your direction throughout your life? A good example might be your career choices, as well as deciding what interventions and strategies to put in, such as, inclusive yoga. And do you believe that insight makes you better at what you do? And if so, in what ways? And I'm also going to ask Corey to kind of answer this too, because who we are and how we think definitely has an impact on the world around us and how we approach it. So what do you think? Like, again, the question is, how has your neurodivergence yourself, like, had the direction of, like, in your life, what you chose to do, how you choose to do it? Like,
That's a great question. I do think it led me to what I do now and makes me, I believe, good at what I do now. I had no intention or plans to be a special education teacher. It just kind of, my life is very all over the place, and that's kind of where I landed. And when I first worked in an autism support classroom, it was a long-term sub job. It just clicked, and it did, so I did it, if that makes sense. It's something that you can either do or you can't do. And for me, I can do it. And I do think part of the ADHD does help because, as I've expressed before, I'm not a planner. I am not a type A. I don't type out lesson plans. Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do until 30 seconds before I do it. If I have a student or a group of students that I start to do something and it just tanks, I can flip and do something else immediately. I'm not like hyper focused on academics and lesson plans. I'm interested in, because I couldn't do that, so I don't know why I would expect my students to do that. Does that make sense? So I'm more interested in helping them self-regulate, self-manage, because I need to as well. And that is one thing that was really strongly emphasized in the yoga classes I took, was that you can't just learn how to teach this, you're going to have to do it yourself. And there was a lot of self-reflection, a lot of doing everything for myself. So I knew how it made me feel, so then I can help others do that too. You can't skip that part. which is a little bit of a tangent that I'm going off on right now, but I do, and I think I really like that question. It made me kind of think about it. My inability to plan, my inability to, my need for things like timers, it helps me with my students. I mentioned earlier, I could never, I don't think, ever teach in the general education capacity. When I'm in those rooms, even if I just need to for a second, I'm like, oh, this looks awful.
It makes you great at working with students who need like the freedom just to be who they are in any moment. And also like if they're tanking, to have that out. So I have somebody who can be like, okay, let's redirect and make this go much better for you. So I think
Exactly.
that your ADHD, as you pointed out, makes you a phenomenal um, person and teacher to work with special individuals. And I love that you were able to put like some of the things that we kind of see ourselves as being negatives, like anywhere else, like the need for timers, like that's usually not a positive. It's not usually like in the positive part. Um, but for you, it's like that's a positive that goes in my pro column. And it's great to be able to find a job that you can just be yourself in. And I think you're phenomenal at what you do.
Thank you.
So Corey, I'm gonna ask you too. So like you're neurodivergent. Now you're dual. So you've got autism and ADHD in your head. So in your life, like how has that influenced the direction, like the stuff that you're interested, the things you want to do, and the ability like to turn maybe what might be like Esther brilliantly said, like these things are usually like not, in some jobs, not winners, but you can make them uh, winners and positives in your life. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. But in the meantime, no, I have had more of a natural organic inclination to be drawn to other people who are neurodivergent, which taught me a lot. Um and which is one of the reasons I wasn't surprised, Jen, that you've um uncovered your own ADHDness, because we got along too well to like uh for that not to be a thing. But anyway, I was talking to my mom recently because when I was a kid, I did so many activities. It was like every day of the week I had something. I did ballet, tap, jazz. When I was older, I danced on point, and I had violin lessons, piano lessons, art lessons. And I always thought, oh, she just wanted to keep me busy, and she valued the arts. And now and she's also admitted that she has ADHD. So, but she said that she couldn't keep up with me, and that she was meeting the demands of my needs. And that blew my mind, because I had a different view of what was happening. I mean, I was extremely privileged to be able to have all of that, and to have parents who valued my uniqueness, and it wasn't like weird or odd, or so I flourished because my creativity was embraced. And I think that's been a huge part of my success.
That's
And
awesome.
I'm all over the place too, and I do different things. And whatever I try, I usually find something enjoyable in it, um and make meaning for myself. And um I think that is the unique part of being both ADHD and on the autism spectrum. Um, right now, so back in the old days, I went to college for music and majored in voice and violin, and then and now I'm in school for web development, and it's very different. Like when you play music, it's you either play the note or you don't. But web development, which I was thinking would be the same, it's very precise, it works or it doesn't, but there's a lot of the unknown and a lot of having to sit in discomfort and waiting to see if it'll work. I do not like it at all. And it takes a lot to work through it, but I've learned so much about myself. So that was a long-winded winding, and I'm not sure I answered, but that's what I
Absolutely.
went
They
with.
said three people with ADHD. I mean, I think we've really like done a great job of super staying on topic this time around.
Yeah.
And I'm
How
gonna
about
answer
you,
that question.
Jen?
I'm gonna answer that question too. So like it hasn't been till recently that I have like accepted, okay, yeah, ADHD here. My son is autistic, which he got from his dad. Obviously belatedly, his dad was never diagnosed, but you look back and you're like, yeah, now that we know, we can see it. The ADHD over here, I'm assuming. Um, and I spent so much of my life just feeling like a failed person. Like, how do people like go to wash dishes and do it in like 10 minutes and not in like an hour and a half? Like, how is that even a thing? Or like, how do 3 hours just disappear? You've accomplished little and now you're late to the next thing that you were supposed to go to. Like, or you go into a room and it's like, or you pick up your phone to do something like simple things. And it's like, why am I here? Wait, oh, look at that. I'm going to do this instead. And then I'll get back to the thing I wanted to do. Like I've always been so off task. But being able to realize through starting, AV and my son's experiences and learning more about him. Okay, Jen, you have ADHD, like flaming ADHD. You're not a loser. But now looking back, I do think it helped me a lot. And it definitely had a lot to do with what I've decided to do with my life. Like I decided, I have a degree in elementary education, but I was been working in the behavioral health field for 10 plus more years because I'm not so interested in, I did subbing, right, for a while. And I was always interested in the kid that was going to have a hard time. Like a teacher would leave a note. I don't know if like you've ever subbed, but the teacher will leave a note and they'll be like, these are the things you have to do. Watch out for Johnny. Johnny is going to have a hard day. So it would be like my main goal that Johnny would have a good day. And you know what I mean? Like I only cared about Johnny. That was it. But to see for that Johnny, like, oh my gosh, the sub came in and they said that I was smart and they enjoyed me and like all that positivity coming at them is something I know that when I left, that was like over, and probably didn't really happen for a lot of substitute teachers. They're probably like, oh, Johnny, like holy water on him. I gotta keep that one in a, like, I don't know, a cage so that it doesn't wreck my day. So I decided, maybe my son then was diagnosed and like, okay, I'm going to work just with these kids. So I just work with Johnnies and I was very good at it. And I think I was very good at it because as Esther was saying, like whether I realized it or not, whether it was like a conscious decision, I had to self-regulate. I really could relate to a lot of the things that my clients were going through, but not having the autistic part of the brain, I was able to like reach the adults, like have the adults connect to the kids because the kids would struggle, to connect to the adults. And I think I was really good at what I did when I did it. Hopefully I'll get back into that someday, but I do think that neurodivergent people help neurodivergent people the most, and it's pretty cool. Like when there's a teacher and, a web designer, a musician, Lola's awake, God help me. Can you hear? So I think that's our cue. Lola?
That's the timer.
Timer. Lola, here, say hi real quick. All right, this is Lola. Okay.
Oh,
She's terrible. She's
Hi,
awful. Say hi.
Lola.
And she says it's time for you to go and let me out and do things. So thank you so much, Esther, for your time.
oh, this
With
was
it.
great.
Stop.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you so much.
This was
This
very
was really fun. Yeah.
It was fun. It was fun. And very like I learned a lot. Like I'm not normally a yoga person, like I'm a sit person nowadays. So, but I might try some of this chair yoga, especially, the supported poses. Give it another shot. Thank you so much for your time and teaching us so much about how that can be beneficial to everyone, but especially people like us.
Thanks for having me. Really, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna follow this up by going to water my garden outside
Hey, you know what? Gardening,
and
super
breathe.
helpful. Midline, all that stuff. Yeah. Breathing, smelling stuff. All right. Bye.